My name is Captain Ember Berry, a 35-year-old trauma surgeon in the U.S. Army. For the last 6 months, my home has been Forward Operating Base Fenty in Afghanistan, a place where the only sound sweeter than silence is the successful landing of a medevac chopper. But the most brutal attack I've endured didn't come from the Taliban. It came from an email sent by my husband, Eric, from the safety of our home in Clarksville, Tennessee. Just 17 words. I've moved on. The money is mine. The house is mine. Good luck over there. Below them were the pictures. A blonde woman, Brittany, grinning in my living room, wearing my silk bathrobe, her feet propped up on the coffee table I'd worked 3 months of weekend shifts to buy. The final photo stopped my heart. She was holding my beagle, Lucky, the same dog Eric told me had died from a tragic accident 2 months ago. He thought 7,000 miles of desert and a war zone had neutralized me. He didn't know that before every deployment, I don't just prepare for war. I prepare for betrayal. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe if you believe no amount of distance can protect a coward from the justice he deserves. The final suture was a perfect, clean line, a small victory of order against the chaos of a shredded limb. For 6 straight hours, the world had shrunk to this single soldier on my operating table. The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor and the coppery tang of blood that hung in the air. A scent no amount of sterile cleaning could ever fully erase. I stripped off my gloves, the latex peeling away with a sticky snap, and tossed them into the biohazard bin. My back screamed in protest, a familiar ache that had become a constant companion on this tour. "He'll keep the leg, Captain," Sergeant Miller said, his voice tired but satisfied as he prepped the patient for post-op. "Good work, Miller," I replied, running a hand over my sweat-damp hair. My job was done. I had put a man back together. Now, all I wanted was to feel like a person again, not just a surgeon. I walked out of the surgical tent into the waning afternoon light. The air at FOB Fenty was a permanent blend of dust, diesel fumes, and something uniquely arid that clung to the back of your throat. The constant low hum of generators was the bass track to our lives here. I made my way across the gravel compound towards the MWR tent, the morale, welfare, and recreation facility that served as our makeshift living room, library, and portal to the outside world. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the quiet clicks of a dozen keyboards. It was our sanctuary. All I wanted was a few minutes of peace and a connection to my real life, the one waiting for me back in Tennessee. I poured a cup of the sludgy black coffee into a dented metal mug. It was bitter, but it was warm. I found an empty chair in the corner, sat down, and powered up my laptop, a small smile already forming on my face. It was our ritual. No matter how busy he was, Eric would send an email every day. The subject line was always the same. "Dad and I miss you, Mom." And attached would be a picture of Lucky, my goofy, floppy-eared beagle, usually asleep on the couch or with his nose pressed against the glass of the back door. It was my lifeline, a single, perfect reminder of the simple, unconditional love waiting for me 7,000 miles away. I saw his name in my inbox and my heart gave a familiar, happy little leap. I clicked it open. But the subject line was wrong. It just said, "Some things you should know." My smile faded. I read the first line. I've moved on. The money is mine. The house is mine. Good luck over there. 17 words. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. I forgot to breathe back in. My ears filled with a high-pitched ringing, blocking out the clicks and hums of the tent. The words didn't make sense. It was like reading a foreign language. I scrolled down, my fingers suddenly numb and clumsy on the trackpad. There were attachments, a PDF of a divorce filing, a bank statement showing our joint savings account, the one holding $38,000, now completely empty. But my brain couldn't process them. They were just meaningless black and white noise. The real attack came next, in the JPEG files. The first photo was of a woman, a smiling blonde I'd never seen before, standing in my living room. She was wearing my silk robe, the one my sister had given me. In the next photo, She was lounging on my sofa, her bare feet propped up on the dark oak coffee table. The table I had seen in an antique shop and fallen in love with. The table I had pulled 3 months of grueling 24-hour weekend shifts at the base hospital back home to afford. It was a calculated act of violation, an invasion, but it was the last attachment that shattered me. The blonde, Brittany, was sitting on my front porch steps, smiling into the camera, and cradled in her arms, licking her chin with frantic, happy energy, was my beagle. My Lucky. His tail was a blur of motion. His eyes were bright. He was healthy. He was happy. He was alive. Alive. The memory hit me like shrapnel. 2 months ago. A crackling call on the satellite phone in the dead of night. Eric's voice, thick with what I thought were sobs. Ember. There was an accident, he choked out. Lucky. He got out the front door. I didn't see him. I had stood there, in the freezing cold of my tent, clutching the phone as he told me Lucky had run into the street, that he'd been hit by a car, that he died on the way to the emergency vet. Eric had cried, telling me how sorry he was, how he'd failed our boy. And I had believed him. I had collapsed onto my cot and wept until my throat was raw, my body shaking with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. I cried alone, in a war zone, mourning my dog, mourning the fact that I couldn't be there to hold him or bury him. I had lost a piece of my heart and I couldn't even go home for the funeral. Now, looking at this picture, I realized that entire performance, his tears, his pain, my grief, had been a lie. A sick, elaborate fiction he had constructed just to hurt me. The original pain of losing Lucky was nothing compared to this new, corrosive agony. This wasn't just a lie. This was a calculated act of psychological torture. The white-hot surge of rage I expected never came. Instead, a terrifying calm washed over me, cold and heavy as a lead blanket. The pain didn't boil over. It flash froze. My breathing evened out. My hands, which had been shaking, became perfectly still. Slowly, deliberately, I moved the cursor and closed the email window. I didn't delete it. I closed my laptop, not with an angry slam, but with a quiet, final click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden silence of my mind. I stood up, left the half-empty coffee mug on the table, and walked out of the tent. The Afghan night had fallen, and the desert air was a shock of cold against my hot skin. I walked away from the lights of the compound, my boots crunching on the gravel until I was standing alone in the darkness. I looked up. The sky was a vast, endless canopy of stars, more brilliant and numerous than I could ever see back home. They were cold, distant, and indifferent. I didn't cry. Tears felt too cheap for this. They were a response to sadness, to loss. This was something else entirely. This was a violation of the soul. Looking up at those silent, burning stars, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't a divorce. It was a declaration of war. A war declared by a monster hiding in a man's skin. And in the profound freezing silence of the Afghan desert, only one question echoed. Why? Standing under the vast, silent Afghan sky, the question why echoed not with grief, but with the cold clarity of a diagnosis. Monsters aren't born overnight. Their pathologies develop over time, fed by a steady diet of jealousy and entitlement. As I walked back toward the dim lights of my barracks, the past began to unspool, not as a collection of fond memories, but as a series of clinical exhibits. Exhibit A, the lie. Exhibit B, the theft. And now, my mind was searching for the origins of the disease. I remembered the early days when I was finishing my surgical residency and he was, between things. He had this intoxicating charm, a way of making you feel like the center of the universe. Your success is my success, Ember, he'd say, his voice smooth as Tennessee whiskey. We're a team. It was a beautiful sentiment, and I believed it, especially when I was writing checks to fund his string of startup ventures. There was the artisanal hot sauce company that never bottled a single sauce, the app for rating craft beers that never got coded, and the consulting firm that had no clients. Each failure was never his fault. It was a bad market, a lazy partner, a missed opportunity. and each time I was there to cushion the fall. Then I got my commission in the Army, Captain Barry. The promotion came with a significant pay raise, and I thought he'd be proud. Instead, something shifted. The supportive teammate was replaced by a man nursing a quiet resentment. We'd be at a dinner party with other officers, and if someone congratulated me, Eric would smile thinly and say, "Yeah, I'm just trying to keep up. It's not easy being married to a real-life G.I. Jane." It always got a nervous laugh, but it was a jab disguised as a joke. Later, in the car on the way home, he'd turn to me, his tone wounded. "You must look at me and just feel disappointed, huh, Captain?" He was an artist, and his chosen medium was guilt. He painted my achievements in shades of betrayal, making me feel that every step forward I took was a step away from him. My success wasn't our success anymore. It was my sin. The memories kept coming, each one another piece of the puzzle. Christmas, 2 years ago. We were at his parents' sprawling home just outside of Nashville. His mother, Carol, always greeted me with a hug that felt more like an assessment, her perfectly manicured hands patting my back while her eyes scanned my outfit. The house was a Pottery Barn catalog come to life, warm, inviting, and utterly superficial. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, and a fire crackled in the hearth. It was the perfect picture of a happy family Christmas. We gathered to open presents. His father got a leather-bound history book. His sister got a designer purse. Then Carol handed me a beautifully wrapped gift. I opened it. It was a cookbook. Southern Hospitality Classics. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on a snowman-themed card. "Hope this inspires you to spend a little more time in the kitchen and a little less time in the operating room next year. Love, Carol." She smiled at me, a sweet, saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A woman can be as successful as she wants," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But her real duty is to keep the home fires burning." I forced a smile, the wrapping paper crinkling in my tight grip. Then it was Eric's turn. He tore open his big gift with childish glee. It was a brand new set of Callaway golf clubs, gleaming and impossibly expensive. He jumped up and gave me a huge kiss on the cheek. "Thank you, baby," he exclaimed, "for always supporting my passions." He held them up for his family to admire, and they all clapped. I sat there, holding a cookbook meant to put me in my place, while they applauded him for spending my money. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter-in-law. I was the family's benefactor, the walking ATM funding their son's leisurely lifestyle. But the clearest exhibit, the one that truly revealed the depth of his character, involved my own parents. My mom and dad are retired teachers. They live a simple, comfortable life in a small town in North Carolina. They save diligently their whole lives and trust people, maybe too much. Eric knew this. He went to them behind my back. He spun a tale about a can't-miss real estate opportunity, a chance to flip a property just before the market boomed. He needed $20,000, he told them, just for a few months. He promised to pay them back double. My parents, wanting to believe in their son-in-law, wanting to help us build our future, liquidated a portion of their retirement savings and gave it to him. I only found out a month later when I was balancing our accounts. When I saw the $20,000 transfer, I felt sick. When I found the bill of sale for a vintage Camaro, a bright red, gas-guzzling cliché, I felt a rage I had never known. I confronted him, my voice shaking. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just shrugged, a smug little smile on his face. "Relax, Ember. What's the big deal?" "The big deal, Eric? You lied to my parents. You took their retirement money." And then he delivered the line that should have ended everything right then and there. "Technically," he said, leaning back on the couch, "it's your inheritance anyway. Just think of it as me getting an advance." He saw my family's love and trust not as something to be cherished, but as a resource to be exploited, just like my salary, just like my home, just like my devotion. Everything clicked into place. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just connected, they formed a perfect, ugly picture. The slow poisoning of my confidence, the condescending gifts from his mother, the theft from my parents, and now, the lie about Lucky. It wasn't a sudden crack in his character. It was the foundation he had built our entire marriage on. They didn't just resent my career, they resented my independence. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to crush the spirit that earned it. The lie about my dog wasn't random cruelty. It was the grand finale, the masterpiece of a con artist who had spent years honing his craft. If you've ever been made to feel small by the very people who were supposed to build you up, hit that like button. And if you've ever had to deal with a manipulative in-law, comment with a simple, "I understand" below. You are not alone. The fog of grief that had clouded my mind for the last hour finally burned away, leaving behind a cold, diamond-hard clarity. This wasn't a tragedy to be mourned. This was an enemy to be fought. I walked over to my cot, my steps now firm and steady. I knelt, pulled the heavy-duty footlocker out from underneath, and unlatched it. Pushing aside my extra uniforms and medical textbooks, I retrieved a thick, unmarked 3-ring binder. Its pages were filled with documents, account numbers, and legal statutes I had hoped I would never need. It was time to review my contingency plan. The war had been declared, and I was done being a casualty. Flipping through the pages of the binder under my cot-side lamp, my focus wasn't on the betrayal. It was on the numbers. Bank statements, pay stubs, deployment orders. I found the line item, a $38,000 deposit into a joint savings account that was now a hollowed-out crater. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my time, my sweat, and my sacrifice. My days here didn't start with a gentle alarm. They started at 0500 hours with the jarring blare of a digital watch. Breakfast wasn't enjoyed over the morning paper. It was a protein bar and instant coffee that tasted like burnt dirt, swallowed while I reviewed the night's incident reports. By 0600, I was in scrubs, entering the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of the field hospital, a world that smelled perpetually of antiseptic and stress. A typical day was 16 hours on my feet, fueled by caffeine and an unrelenting sense of duty. 16 hours of holding lives in my hands, making split-second decisions that would determine if a soldier went home whole or in a box. There were days of relative quiet, spent organizing supplies and training medics. And then there were the other days. The days the familiar whump 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 of an incoming dust-off chopper, a Black Hawk medevac, sent a jolt of adrenaline through the entire hospital. Those were the days we earned our pay. I thought about the nights I'd spent awake because the choppers just kept landing, one after another, bringing us the brutal aftermath of an IED blast. We worked until our bodies screamed and our minds went numb, moving from one mangled body to the next, a grim assembly line of salvation. In those moments, there was no past, no future. There was only the patient on the table and the desperate prayer that your skills would be enough. I'd collapse on my cot at the end of those shifts, too tired to even take off my boots. And while I was living that reality, what was Eric doing? I could picture him perfectly. Waking up around 9, making a fresh pot of gourmet coffee, sitting on our back porch in my silk robe, scrolling through his phone. The sheer, damning injustice of that contrast settled in my bones, not as anger, but as a cold, heavy weight. That $38,000 wasn't just a number. It was a ledger of my life. Each dollar had a story. There was the hostile fire and imminent danger pay, an extra $225 a month. The government's way of saying, sorry, your life is constantly at risk. There was the re-enlistment bonus, a lump sum that came with the commitment of another 4 years of my life to the Army. Another 4 years of missed birthdays and holidays. The rest was my salary, meticulously saved. Every dollar represented a choice, a sacrifice. It was the new car I didn't buy, the vacations we never took. It was every late-night meal from a vending machine, every lonely holiday spent on base. I had hoarded that money for what I thought was our future. A down payment on a bigger house, a safety net for when we decided to start a family. I had traded moments of my life for that money. And Eric had taken it to fund a new life with someone else, as casually as withdrawing cash for a weekend trip. He hadn't just emptied a bank account. He had stolen my past and foreclosed on my future. Just as that cold weight threatened to pull me under, the flap of my tent was thrown open. It was a young corpsman, his face pale and eyes wide. "Captain Barry, we've got a critical incoming. Multiple GSWs, severe trauma to the lower extremities. ETA, 2 minutes." My personal hell would have to wait. I slammed the binder shut, shoved it back in my footlocker, and sprinted toward the surgical tent. My training took over, pushing the noise of Eric and Brittany to a distant corner of my mind. The patient was a kid, no older than 19, his face a mask of shock and pain. His legs were a mess, a textbook case of what a high-caliber machine gun can do to bone and flesh. For the next 8 hours, he was my entire world. I worked with a detached, intense focus, clamping arteries, debriding tissue, setting shattered bones with pins and rods. It was a brutal, bloody, intricate puzzle. And with every suture, every clamp, I was fighting. I was fighting for him. Finally, it was over. We had stabilized him. We had saved his legs. I walked over to the recovery area hours later, exhausted but needing to see it through. The soldier was just beginning to stir, his eyes fluttering open, clouded with morphine and confusion. He looked down at the bulky casts encasing his lower body. Then his eyes found mine, filled with a raw, primal fear. His voice was a dry, raspy whisper. "Doc, my legs. Are they still there?" It was the question I heard more than any other, the question that held a young man's entire future in its trembling balance. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold, but he gripped mine with surprising strength. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steady and clear. "They are private, both of them. You're going to walk on American soil again." A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He squeezed my hand once, a silent thank you, and then drifted back to sleep. In that moment, none of the betrayal mattered. My money, my house, my husband. It was all just noise. This was real. This was what I did. I save lives. I rebuild what the world tries to destroy. And no thief, no liar, no coward could ever take that away from me. That purpose, that value, was mine alone. I was cleaning up, running on fumes, when Staff Sergeant Martinez appeared at my elbow. He was a career medic, a quiet, grizzled man who had seen more combat than most generals. He pressed a steaming mug of coffee into my hands. He finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You look like you need this, Captain." He paused, then added, "Don't let the bastards back home get to you. The real war is right here." He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew the look of someone fighting a battle on 2 fronts. He nodded once, a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect, and walked away. I stood there, holding the mug. That simple cup of coffee, offered in silent understanding by a fellow soldier, felt more like family than anything I'd gotten from the bishops in years. It was a reminder. I wasn't fighting this alone, and in the U.S. Army, you never have to. Tomorrow, I decided I would visit the JAG office. The next morning, Sergeant Martinez's words echoed in my mind. "The real war is right here." He was right. And I was done fighting it alone. Clutching the thick binder to my chest, I walked with renewed purpose across the base. The warmth from his simple kindness had rekindled something in me, a memory of strength I had almost forgotten. It was from a professional development seminar 3 years ago, back at Fort Campbell. The guest speaker was a retired 2-star general, a woman in her late 60s with iron gray hair and an attitude that could cut glass. She had commanded troops in Desert Storm and Iraq, a true trailblazer. She told us war stories, but the one that stuck with me wasn't about combat. It was about her first deployment as a young lieutenant. Her husband, left at home, had run up tens of thousands of dollars in debt on her credit cards and then filed for divorce, leaving her to face financial ruin while she was serving overseas. "Listen to me, ladies," she had said, her voice booming through the auditorium. "As a woman in the military, you must always have plan A, plan B, and a plan, oh hell no, they're all bastards. Never let yourself be put in a passive position. Be naive with your heart if you must, but be a stone-cold cynic with your money. Love doesn't pay the bills, and it sure as hell won't protect your bank account." Her words had hit me hard. At the time, Eric and I were happy, but her story planted a seed of caution in my mind. It was a wake-up call that the uniform on my body didn't make me immune to the battles fought at home. Fueled by that memory, I found the small prefabricated building that housed the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Army's legal arm. The office was sparse and functional: metal desks, stacks of legal manuals, and the ever-present flags of the United States and the U.S. Army. Behind one of those desks sat Major Patricia Holmes. She was a sharp, impeccably dressed African-American woman whose gaze seemed to penetrate right through you. There was no nonsense about her. I had braced myself for a tedious, bureaucratic process. I expected looks of pity, or perhaps a lecture on marital finances. I was prepared to be treated like a hysterical woman. So I just laid it all out, clinically and concisely, as if presenting a patient's case. I detailed the timeline, the lies, the financial theft. I slid the printout of Eric's email and the pictures across her desk. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just stated the facts. Major Holmes listened in absolute silence, her expression unreadable. She scanned the email, her eyes lingering on the picture of Lucky. She didn't offer a single word of sympathy. When I finished, she simply nodded, her face set like granite. I held my breath, waiting for the verdict, the dismissal, the platitude. Instead, she looked up at me, and a wry, humorless smile touched her lips. "Welcome to the club, Captain," she said, her voice devoid of pity but full of a weary solidarity. "You're not the first, and you sure as hell won't be the last. But you might be the best prepared I've ever seen." A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost buckled my knees. I wasn't a hysterical woman. I was a member of a club I never wanted to join. "Financial abuse of deployed service members is a silent epidemic, Captain Barry," she continued, her tone shifting from weary to razor-sharp. "Predators like your husband count on distance, distraction, and the emotional turmoil of deployment to get away with it. They see your sacrifice as their opportunity." She tapped a finger on the printout. "But what he did, lying about your dog, that's a special kind of sick." She met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fire in hers. "He made a critical error. He picked a fight with an active-duty U.S. Army officer, and in doing so, he declared war on us. That was a fatal mistake." "That's why I'm here, ma'am," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "That general's speech, it scared me enough to take action. I hoped I'd never need it." I opened my binder. 3 years ago, I explained, I consulted with a civilian attorney and established an irrevocable trust. My military pay is deposited directly into it. The deed to the house, which I bought before we were married, is held by the trust. My primary assets are legally shielded. Major Holmes's eyebrows shot up. She leaned forward, a new level of respect in her eyes. I continued, pointing to the documents. "The joint savings account, that $38,000, that was the bait. It was a separate account I funded specifically for our shared future. I made it accessible, visible. I needed to know if he could be trusted. I gave him a gun and waited to see if he would pull the trigger. And he walked right into the trap," she finished, a slow, predatory grin spreading across her face. "Captain Barry, you are a damn artist." For the first time since opening that email, I felt a shift inside me. The ice of shock and grief began to crack, not with sadness, but with the heat of righteous anger, now focused and aimed. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a combatant, and I had just found my commanding officer. Major Holmes picked up her phone. "I'm making a call to a colleague in the States. We're going to invoke the Service Members Civil Relief Act to protect you from that divorce filing, and then we're going on the offensive. We're going to freeze every account he has access to, effective immediately." She looked at me as she started to dial, her smile gone, replaced by a look of grim determination. "The gambit has begun, Captain." And as I listened to the sharp, confident tones of her voice laying out the first steps of the assault, I felt the first spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. The game had changed. He thought he was the predator. He was about to find out he was the prey. The first move in a chess game isn't about capturing a piece, it's about controlling the board. Following Major Holmes's lead, my first move wasn't a furious tirade or a list of demands. It was a simple email, a reply to Eric's 17-word declaration of war. I typed out 5 words, my face illuminated by the cold glow of the laptop screen in my dark tent. Are you sure about that? No explanation, no emotion, just a question. I hit send. The goal wasn't to threaten him, it was to infect his arrogance with a seed of doubt. A man as smug as Eric wouldn't see it as a legitimate threat, he'd see it as the desperate, empty words of a woman 7,000 miles away. Perfect. A predator never suspects the prey of having a trap of its own. Let him underestimate me. His vanity was his greatest vulnerability, and I planned to exploit it. I didn't have to wait long for a reaction, but it didn't come from Eric. A few days later, my satellite phone rang with a familiar number, Carol Bishop, Eric's mother. The last time we'd spoken, her voice had been dripping with fake sympathy over Lucky's death. This time, the sweetness was gone, replaced by a shrill, accusatory screech. "Ember, what have you done?" she shrieked, her voice so sharp I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Eric's accounts are all frozen. He can't even buy groceries, and that poor sweet girl Brittany, the landlord, kicked her out. She's on the street." I stayed silent, letting her frantic energy expend itself. Then she played her trump card. "Do you have any idea the stress you're putting her under? She's pregnant, Ember. You're ruining your husband's life, and you're threatening the life of my grandchild." I felt a brief, cold shock. Pregnant? It was a masterful move, I had to admit. A classic manipulator's gambit designed to trigger my guilt, my sense of decency. But after years of their subtle and not-so-subtle deceptions, my bullshit detector was finely tuned. This was just another lie, bigger and more desperate than the last. The shock faded, replaced by a calm, chilling certainty. "Your grandchild, Carol?" I replied, my voice even and low. "Then I suggest Eric find a job instead of living off other people's money." I ended the call before she could unleash another volley of hysterics. I sat there for a moment, marveling at their audacity. They weren't sorry. They weren't ashamed. They were just angry they'd been caught. The next communication came from Eric himself. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the sniveling panic of a cornered animal. It was a long, rambling email, a novel of self-pity. He wrote about the humiliation of having his cards declined, of being locked out of the house by my attorney's preliminary injunction. He was homeless, penniless, a victim of my cruelty. He painted a pathetic picture of a man wronged. Then came the offer. The bargain. He said he was willing to be the bigger person. He would agree to give me half the money back, half of my own money, if I would just call off the lawyers and stop this madness. I read the entire email twice, searching for 2 words. I'm sorry. They weren't there. There was no apology for the theft, no remorse for the lies, and most damningly, not a single mention of Lucky. He wasn't trying to make amends. He was just trying to cut his losses. His only regret was getting caught. I didn't even bother to reply. I simply forwarded the entire email to Major Holmes with a single line in the body. More evidence for the file. The final call came a day later. It was from a man I had once respected, a man I had looked to as a father figure. Howard Bishop, Eric's dad. His voice wasn't shrill like his wife's or pathetic like his son's. It was a deep, booming baritone, thick with patriarchal authority and cold fury. "I don't know what kind of notions you've picked up in that man's army, Ember," he began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "But the Bishop family does not air its dirty laundry in a courtroom. You are embarrassing this family." I listened, my blood turning to ice. "Eric is my son," he continued, his voice rising. "He may have made a mistake, a youthful indiscretion. But that is a private matter to be handled within the family. You are his wife. Your duty is to be forgiving, to stand by your husband. That is what a good woman does. You will drop this lawsuit immediately." Every word was a hammer blow, an attempt to pound me back into the subservient role they had cast for me. He wasn't appealing to my love or my history with his son. He was giving me an order, as if I were some misbehaving child. The patronizing tone, the blatant sexism, the utter dismissal of the crimes his son had committed. It was all there. A youthful indiscretion. Eric was 36 years old. He took my silence as submission and pressed his advantage. You need to think about your obligations, about what people will say. Do the right thing, Ember. End this now, or you will regret it. Do not force my hand. That was it. The final thread. His words didn't break me, they freed me. Any lingering shadow of obligation, of family, of the woman I used to be, was burned away by the heat of his righteous indignation. He wasn't defending his son. He was defending a system of entitlement and abuse that had protected his son his entire life. I took a slow, deep breath. Howard, I said, my voice quiet but as cold and hard as the steel of my scalpel. Your family's honor was destroyed by your son, not by me. My duty is to my country and to myself, not to a thief and a liar. And yes, I will see you and your son and anyone who enables him in court. I ended the call before he could sputter out a response. There would be no more negotiations, no more second chances. I picked up my satellite phone again, but this time I wasn't receiving a call. I was making one. To Major Holmes. She picked up on the second ring. Holmes. It's time, Major, I said, my voice steady, without a tremor of doubt. Full broadside, no mercy. My call with Howard Bishop had been the final straw. His patriarchal decree, his demand for my submission, didn't shatter me. It forged me. The moment I ended that call, the woman who had once sought their approval, who had once called them family, ceased to exist. In her place was Captain Ember Barry, a field-grade officer who understood one thing perfectly. When an enemy reveals their position, you don't hesitate. You strike. My call to Major Holmes was brief and to the point. No mercy. Understood, Captain, was her only reply. An hour later, I was on a secure video conference call. On my laptop screen were two faces, Major Holmes, looking resolute from her office on base, and a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense haircut named Rebecca Chen, my civilian attorney, patched in from her office in Clarksville. The war was now being fought on two fronts, military and civilian. I didn't recount the events with emotion. I reported them as if giving a battlefield assessment. At 1800 hours Zulu time, I received a call from the subject's mother, Carol Bishop. She made a false claim of pregnancy to elicit an emotional response. At 2140 hours Zulu, I received a communication from the subject's father, Howard Bishop. He attempted verbal intimidation and issued a demand to cease legal action. I forwarded them the email from Eric. The subject has attempted to bargain, offering a partial return of stolen funds in exchange for amnesty. I paused, then looked directly into the laptop's camera, my gaze locking with theirs. Let me be perfectly clear. I am no longer interested in a settlement. I am no longer interested in retrieving the money. That is secondary. I want justice. I want accountability for every single act. The financial theft, the emotional abuse, the conspiracy to defraud, the harassment. I want you to use the full weight of the law, both civilian and military. I want you to burn their world to the ground. Rebecca Chen, who I'd only known through emails, cracked a grim smile. Captain Barry, she said, her voice crisp and confident. That is exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Let's get to work. The shift in my own spirit was palpable. The daze was gone, replaced by a singular, driving purpose. That evening, for the first time in weeks, I didn't eat alone in my tent. I joined a few of my colleagues at a table in the DFAC, the dining facility. Sergeant Martinez was there, along with a couple of young lieutenants and the corpsman I'd worked with earlier. The conversation was the usual mix of dark humor and shop talk that soldiers use to stay sane. But sitting there, under the harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by the clatter of trays and the low rumble of 100 conversations, I felt an overwhelming need to break my own silence. I got an email from my husband, I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the chatter at our table. They all stopped and looked at me. In our world, news from home was sacred. I didn't cry. I didn't get hysterical. I just laid out the facts, my voice as steady as it was in the operating room. I told them about the 17 words, the emptied bank account, the woman in my house. I told them about the phone calls, the manipulation, the demands. Then my voice wavered for just a fraction of a second. And he told me my dog, Lucky, had been killed in an accident 2 months ago. I mourned him. The last picture in the email was of the other woman holding him. He's alive. The table went dead silent. The young corpsman's fork clattered onto his tray. One of the lieutenants, a fresh-faced kid from Ohio, slammed his fist on the table, making the salt shaker jump. "That son of a bitch!" he seethed. Sergeant Martinez, who had been listening with an unreadable expression, simply reached over and placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've got your six, Captain," he said, his voice a low growl. The military term for "we've got your back." That bastard and his family have no idea who they just picked a fight with. The simple, unconditional support from my team, my real family, was the final piece of armor clicking into place. They didn't offer pity. They offered solidarity. They offered a shared sense of outrage. They were ready to go to war with me. Back in my tent that night, I pulled out my official green notebook, the one the Army issues to every soldier. I didn't write about the pain. I didn't write about the heartbreak. I wrote a mission statement. I remembered a verse from a Bible study class my mother had made me attend as a kid, a verse that never made sense until now. Matthew 10:36. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Sometimes the most righteous war is the one fought against the people who were supposed to love you. My pen moved across the page, the words sharp and decisive. Objective. Justice. Enemy. Eric Bishop and enablers. Legacy protocol. Eric's betrayal will not be the legacy of this marriage. Justice will be its legacy. My resilience will be its legacy. He chose this battlefield. He will regret it. If you believe that standing up for yourself is the ultimate act of power, hit that like button. And if you've ever had to declare your own no mercy moment to protect your peace, comment with a single word, warrior, below. It was no longer the diary of a victim. It was the battle log of a soldier. The oath was written. Now it was time to gather the ammunition. The declaration of war was made. Now began the cold, quiet work of gathering intelligence and sharpening our weapons. My life fell into a strange dual rhythm. By day, I was Captain Barry, trauma surgeon, suturing wounds and setting bones, my focus absolute. But in the quiet hours of the Afghan night, I was a different kind of soldier, a plaintiff in a war of attrition, communicating with my legal team and watching the pieces of my strategy fall into place. My first briefing came from Major Holmes. "We've deployed our legal nuclear option," she told me over a secure line. "The Service Members Civil Relief Act, or SCRE. Eric's divorce filing has been put on hold until you return. But that's just defense. The offense is where it gets interesting." She explained that the SCRA contains clauses that make it a federal crime to defraud an active duty service member. "This is no longer a messy divorce, Captain," she said, her voice grimly satisfied. "By stealing from you while you're deployed in a combat zone, he has committed a crime against the United States government. I've forwarded your file to the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. They tend to take these things very personally." The wheels were turning, but the next piece of ammunition came from an unexpected source. I received an email with the subject line, "News from the Home Front." It was from Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor in Clarksville. She's a tough-as-nails widow of a Vietnam veteran who had unofficially adopted me when I first moved in. "Hello, dear," she wrote in her typically blunt style. "Just thought you'd like to know the sheriff escorted your soon-to-be ex and his little girlfriend off your property yesterday. It was quite the show. Good riddance. Also, I have something for you." Attached to the email was a video file. I clicked play. The video was grainy, time-stamped from the week before, clearly captured by her doorbell security camera. The angle showed the side of my house, my garage, and there was Eric. He and another man were hauling my belongings out of the house. I watched in cold fury as they struggled with my mother's old upright piano, a family heirloom, loading it onto a beat-up pickup truck. Next came boxes. Boxes I recognized. My family photo albums. My father's collection of vintage books. My medical school textbooks. They weren't just moving his things out, they were liquidating my life, piece by precious piece, selling my memories for pocket change. The anger that rose in me wasn't hot and explosive. It was a freezing, dense rage. This was no longer about money. This was about erasure. He was trying to wipe my existence from the home I had built. I saved the video file and sent it to Rebecca Chen with a one-line note: evidence of theft and conversion of personal property. The next bombshell came 2 days later, during a call with Rebecca. "You're not going to believe this, Ember," she said, a note of astonishment in her voice. "We just got a call. From Brittany." I was silent, waiting. "She's terrified," Rebecca explained. "Apparently, being named as a co-conspirator in a federal investigation has a way of clearing the conscience. She wants to cooperate. She wants to make a deal." "What did she say?" I asked, my voice flat. Rebecca took a deep breath. "She claims Eric told her the whole story. His version, anyway. He told her that his wife, an army captain, was tragically killed in action in Afghanistan a few months ago. He told her he was the sole heir, grieving his heroic wife, and that he had just inherited the house and a small fortune. She thought she was moving in with a heartbroken widower." I had to sit down on my cot. The sheer pathological depth of his deception was breathtaking. He hadn't just lied to me. He had constructed an entirely separate reality, built on a foundation of my supposed death. He was so convinced of my powerlessness, so certain that 7,000 miles had rendered me a ghost, that he had actually told people I was one. He was living in my house, spending my money, and sleeping with another woman, all while playing the part of a grieving husband. The sickness of it was beyond anything I could have imagined. He wasn't just a thief, he was a ghoul, dancing on a grave he had dug for me in his own mind. The final, decisive piece of intelligence arrived via a short, encrypted email from Major Holmes. "Captain, case has been accepted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Nashville Field Office. The lead agent assigned is a woman by the name of Maria Martinez. She informs me it's one of the most brazen cases of service member fraud she's ever encountered. They are pursuing charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and fraud against the U.S. government. They believe the total amount stolen is significantly higher than $38,000. They are taking over. Stand by. Major P. Holmes." I read the email 3 times. The FBI. A federal case. The name Martinez felt like a sign from the universe, a circle of justice closing. The rage, the shock, the grief, all of it finally receded, replaced by an unnerving, profound calm. The battle was no longer mine to fight alone. I had prepared the battlefield, I had gathered the intelligence, and now I had called in the heavy artillery. The full force and weight of the United States federal government was about to descend upon Eric Bishop of Clarksville, Tennessee. The machine was in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the gears to grind him into dust. The weeks that followed were a strange sort of quiet. The harassing calls and emails stopped. The board was set, the pieces were in motion, and all I could do was my job. I stitched up soldiers, held hands, and watched medevac choppers fly in and out, all while a silent, invisible war was being waged on my behalf half a world away. The first major strike was reported to me via a video call from FBI Special Agent Maria Martinez. Her face was professional, her tone all business, but her eyes held a spark of righteous fire. "Captain Barry," she began, "we've completed our preliminary investigation. The scope of your husband's fraud is extensive." She laid it out, point by damning point. Eric hadn't just stolen the $38,000 from our savings. Using my social security number and military deployment orders as proof of my absence, he had opened 5 credit cards in my name. He had maxed them all out. He had taken out 2 personal loans, also in my name. And the final, most audacious crime, he had forged my signature on documents in an attempt to take out a second mortgage on my house, the house legally protected by my trust. The total amount we've tallied so far exceeds $100,000, Agent Martinez concluded, her expression grim. He didn't just try to rob you, he tried to obliterate your financial future. He dug his own grave, Captain. I didn't feel shock or even fresh anger. I just felt a cold, clinical validation. The pathology was worse than I had diagnosed. The next call came from Rebecca Chen, my civilian lawyer. There was an almost giddy energy in her voice. He tried to run, she said. The feds went to his parents' house to bring him in for questioning. He must have gotten tipped off because he wasn't there. They put out a bolo. Be on the lookout. Did they find him? I asked, my voice calm. Oh, they found him, Rebecca chuckled. He didn't make it very far. They picked him up at the Greyhound bus station in downtown Nashville. He had a duffel bag stuffed with nearly $10,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to Miami. A few hours later, an email from her arrived. The subject line was a single word: justice. Attached was a photo, a low-resolution image taken by a local news photographer. It showed Eric, his face pale and unshaven, his arrogant smirk gone, replaced by a slack-jawed look of disbelief. His hands were cuffed behind his back, and a federal agent was guiding him into the back of a black SUV. The man who had worn my silk robe and called himself a victim was now just another common criminal in handcuffs. The next day, the front page of the Clarksville Leaf-Chronicle's website featured the story. The headline was blunt: Clarksville man arrested for defrauding deployed U.S. Army spouse. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. In a town like Clarksville, so closely tied to the Fort Campbell military base, a story like that spreads like wildfire. The bishop's precious family honor wasn't just tarnished, it was publicly and permanently torched. I looked at the picture of Eric being arrested, this pathetic, cowardly stranger, and I waited for the surge of triumph, of victory. It never came. I just felt quiet, empty. The monster had been caged. The hunt was over. The final act came a week later, in a conference call with Major Holmes and Rebecca. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, the bank records, Mrs. Patterson's security video, Brittany's sworn testimony about my death, and the forged mortgage documents, Eric collapsed. His bravado, his entitlement, his entire world of lies crumbled under the weight of federal prosecution. He's taking a plea deal, Major Holmes informed me, her voice ringing with finality. He pleads guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. In exchange, the other charges are dropped. What are the terms? I asked. Rebecca read them off like a death sentence. 12 years in a federal penitentiary, full restitution of all stolen funds, plus interest and penalties. He will forfeit any and all claims to any marital property, including the house and its contents. The divorce will be granted, and he will be barred from ever contacting you or your family again. 12 years. It was a lifetime. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with overwhelming force. That night, my satellite phone rang one last time. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I answered and put the phone on speaker, placing it on the small table in my tent. It was Carol and Howard Bishop. They were both on the line, their voices broken and unrecognizable. The arrogant matriarch and the booming patriarch were gone, replaced by 2 weeping, pleading parents. "Ember, please," Carol sobbed. "He's our son, our only son. Don't do this. You have to show some mercy. He's your husband." "Think of the good times," Howard begged, his voice cracking. "He made a mistake, but he loves you. Don't let them send our boy to prison. Please, we're begging you." I listened silently as they cycled through pleas, threats, and tears, their words washing over me without effect. They weren't sorry for what Eric did. They were only sorry he was facing the consequences. When they finally fell silent, exhausted from their pleas, I picked up the phone. My voice was calm and measured, each word spoken with the precision of a surgeon making a final, clean cut. "He was my husband when he lied and told me my dog was dead," I said. "He was my husband when he stole my life savings while I was serving in a combat zone. He was my husband when he told his girlfriend I was killed in action. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Now he is a federal inmate, and I am not married to a federal inmate. I pressed the end call button, and then with a final deliberate motion, I blocked their number forever. The war was over. I had won. But as I stared at the black screen of my phone, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty. After the final phone call, after blocking the bishops from my life forever, an unnerving silence descended. The war was over. The flurry of calls, emails, and legal strategies that had consumed my nights for weeks suddenly ceased. There were no more enemies to fight, no more moves to counter. There was just me, the quiet hum of the base generator, and the vast empty desert outside my tent. I had expected to feel a surge of elation, a profound sense of victory. But as the adrenaline faded, it left behind a hollow ache. I had won. But what was the prize? A marriage turned to ash. A family that never was. A gaping hole where a significant part of my life used to be. The cost of this victory was the complete and total annihilation of my past. Sitting on my cot, I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt tired. Exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with 16-hour surgeries. For the first time, I let myself feel the simple, uncomplicated sadness of it all. A few days later, a soldier from another unit stopped by my tent. "Captain Barry, got a package for you. Came in on the mail transport." He handed me a standard manila envelope. My name was written on the front in a familiar, looping script. It was from Sarah, my best friend from college. She was the one who had navigated the legal maze to get Lucky out of the house after Eric's arrest and was keeping him safe for me. I tore it open. Inside wasn't a long letter, just a single folded piece of paper and a small index card. The index card was stiff, and on it, in non-toxic black ink, was a perfect little paw print. Lucky's paw print. I ran my thumb over it, feeling the faint texture. Then I unfolded the letter. Sarah's handwriting was on the page, but the words were not hers. "Dear Mom, I miss you. The new place is okay, but Aunt Sarah doesn't give as many belly rubs. I wait by the door a lot. I hope you come home soon. I have a lot of licks saved up for you. Love, Lucky." That was it. That was what finally broke me. The wall I had so carefully constructed, the cold, hard fortress of a soldier and a surgeon, crumbled into dust. I held that little piece of paper, stared at that perfect paw print, and I cried. It wasn't the angry, frustrated crying of betrayal. It wasn't the gut-wrenching grief I had felt when I thought he was gone. It was a quiet, cleansing flood of tears. I cried for the pure, innocent love of a dog who had been used as a weapon. I cried for his confusion and his loyalty. I cried because in a world that had become so complicated and ugly, his love was the one true, simple thing I had left. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I wasn't a captain or a plaintiff or a warrior. I was just a woman who desperately missed her dog. That night, after the tears had subsided, I opened my green notebook again. The pages were filled with battle plans and mission statements. But now, I needed to write a new doctrine, for myself. My mind turned to the word forgiveness. The bishops had begged for it, using it as another tool of manipulation, a duty I was supposed to perform. I knew I could never forgive Eric for what he did, not in the way they meant. Forgetting was impossible. Excusing it was a betrayal of myself. But as I sat there, I realized there were other kinds of forgiveness. I could forgive myself. I could forgive myself for being blind, for wanting to believe in the man he pretended to be. I could forgive myself for trusting someone who was never worthy of it. That wasn't a weakness. It was a testament to my own capacity for love, a capacity he never had. And I could choose to release myself from the anger. It had served its purpose. It had been the fuel that powered me through the fight. But carrying it forever would be like carrying a rucksack full of rocks. It would only weigh me down. Eric was in a cage of his own making. My anger wouldn't add a single day to his sentence, but it would steal days from my own life. I wrote in my journal, the words flowing with a newfound clarity. My revenge is not his 12 years in prison. My revenge will be my peace. My revenge will be the successful career I continue to build. the joy I find in small things, and the quiet, happy life I will create for myself. A life he can never touch. The act of writing it down felt like a release, a formal end to my own internal war. I was no longer his victim, and I refused to be his prisoner. With only a few weeks left in my deployment, I made a phone call. It wasn't to a lawyer or a general. I pulled up the website for the Tennessee Beagle Rescue on my laptop. I found their number and dialed. A friendly voice answered, "Tennessee Beagle Rescue, this is Linda." "Hi, Linda," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "My name is Ember Berry. I'm a captain in the U.S. Army, currently serving in Afghanistan, but I'm coming home soon." I explained my situation, that my beagle, Lucky, would be coming home to me. "He's been through a lot," I said, "and I think he's going to need a friend. I saw on your site you have a 1-year-old male who was abandoned, the one with the sad eyes." "You mean Justice?" Linda asked, her voice warm. Justice. The name was too perfect. "Yes," I said, the word feeling more significant than I expected. "That's the one. I'd like to start the adoption process." The arrangements were made. I had 2 lives to go home to now. One that had been waiting patiently for me, and one that I would save, just as, in a way, they were both saving me. It was the first decision I had made that wasn't about the past, about the war. It was about the future. It was the first brick I laid for my new life. 3 months after Eric was sentenced, my tour ended. The flight home from Bagram Airfield was long and loud, the inside of the C-17 Globemaster buzzing with the exhausted energy of soldiers on their way home. I watched the arid, brown landscape of Afghanistan disappear beneath the clouds for the last time. When the wheels of the massive transport plane finally touched down on the tarmac at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, the thump and screech of the tires on American soil was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I had left this country as a wife. I was returning as a free woman. After deprocessing, I took a commercial flight to Nashville. As I walked down the concourse, I saw her waiting, my older sister, Jenna. She was the only one in my family I'd told the whole story to, the only one who had listened without judgment. Her response a simple, unwavering, "What do you need me to do?" Seeing her standing there, her face breaking into a relieved smile, was like seeing the sun for the first time after a long, brutal winter. We didn't say anything. We just hugged, and I let the tears I'd been holding back for months finally fall. Tears not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. My first stop in Clarksville wasn't my own house. It was Sarah's. The moment I opened my car door, I heard it. A frantic, joyous barking. The front door of her house flew open and a brown and white missile shot out. Lucky. He launched himself at me, whining and yelping, his entire body wriggling with an ecstasy so pure it felt holy. I dropped to my knees on the grass and wrapped my arms around him as he licked every inch of my face, his tail thumping against my back like a drum. All the pain, all the strategy, all the anger of the past few months melted away in that single, perfect moment of unconditional love. I buried my face in his soft fur, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of him. "Mama's home, buddy," I whispered, my voice thick. "Mama's home for good." An hour later, I stood before the front door of my own house. My house. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Sarah and Jenna had aired it out and cleaned it, erasing any trace of its previous occupants. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of lemon polish and possibility. My eyes landed on the dark oak coffee table in the living room. For a moment, I saw the ghost of a stranger's feet propped up on it. But then the image faded. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a monument to a war I had fought and won. This was my house, bought with my money, defended by my intellect, and now reclaimed by my spirit. The next day, I drove to the Tennessee Beagle Rescue. A shy, skinny beagle with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen was waiting for me. I knelt down, and he cautiously crept forward, sniffing my outstretched hand. I named him Justice. He and Lucky were wary of each other for about 5 minutes, And then they were inseparable, a whirlwind of floppy ears and happy tails. My little family was starting to take shape. A few weeks after I returned, I threw a welcome home party in my backyard. The guest list was small and carefully curated. There were no bishops. There was no one from my old life. Instead, there was my sister Jenna, my friend Sarah, and Mrs. Patterson from next door, who brought her famous 7-layer dip. Rebecca Chen drove up from her office, and I was surprised and touched when Staff Sergeant Martinez, who was back in the States on leave, showed up with his wife. It was a strange, eclectic group. Soldiers, lawyers, neighbors. But as I looked around the yard at the people laughing and talking, with Lucky and Justice chasing a frisbee on the lawn, I realized this was my real family. My chosen family. The one forged not by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and support. Several months have passed since that day. My life has found a new, peaceful rhythm. I'm working at the hospital at Fort Campbell now, my days filled with the familiar challenges and rewards of medicine. The house is no longer just a structure. It's a home, filled with the click-clack of dog nails on the hardwood floor and the smell of coffee brewing in the morning. I'm sitting on my back porch now, a glass of sweet tea sweating in the summer heat. Lucky is asleep at my feet, and Justice is meticulously trying to dig a hole to China in the middle of the yard. It's a perfectly ordinary, perfectly beautiful afternoon. I have my laptop open, and I'm looking at an email I just received. It's from a young Army lieutenant, a woman I've never met. She said Major Holmes had suggested she reach out to me. She's about to go on her first deployment, and her fiancé is pressuring her to add him to her bank accounts. She's asking for advice on how to protect herself financially without damaging her relationship. I look at her words, and I feel a profound sense of purpose settle over me. Eric's betrayal was a deep and brutal wound. But a wound, once it heals, leaves a scar. And a scar is a mark of survival. It's a testament to the fact that you were stronger than whatever tried to break you. He tried to erase me, to turn my life into a tragedy. But instead, his actions turned my story into a lesson. His betrayal forced me to become a warrior. And now, my experience can be a shield for others. He may have been the author of my pain, but I am the author of my legacy. I smile, a real, genuine smile. My revenge isn't a man wasting away in a prison cell. My revenge is this peace, this strength, this purpose. I take a sip of my tea, and I begin to type my reply. Dear Lieutenant, I write, thank you for reaching out. Let me tell you a story. As I sit here, about to send this email to a fellow soldier, I realize my story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who has ever had to fight a battle no one else could see and chose to become their own rescuer. This channel is dedicated to those stories, to the quiet warriors who turn their deepest wounds into their greatest strengths. If my journey has resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the like button, so this message of resilience can reach others who need it. In the comments below, I'd be honored if you'd share just one word that defines your own victory, your peace, your justice, your legacy. Thank you for listening. Stay strong and build your own dawn.